A lot of people say that libertarians don't believe in government. That's not an accurate assessment. Let me explain. I worked for the United States Navy. My father worked for the United States Navy. My grandfather worked for the United States Navy. My uncle and my half-brother worked for the United States Navy. My cousin is currently serving in the United States Air Force out in Guam. My mother worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation. My sister currently works for a city government here in Washington State. I myself, I worked for the state senate 15 years ago as a session aide, and more recently I served as a school teacher at a public high school at a skill center in Puyallup, Washington. I'm not anti-government, but I believe that there are certain specific things that the government should do, and there are things that the government shouldn't do. When an architect builds a building, they don't just say, oh, well, we need more concrete or we need less girders. What an architect does is they look at what the building is supposed to do. And they say, okay, well, we need these certain structural members in these places in order to hold the building up. And that is the libertarian philosophy on government. We don't believe in achieving some kind of nebulous balance. We don't believe that we need to decide more or less government. We believe that the government actually has a technically definable role in society that is there for a specific reason, and that when government doesn't do those things, that society collapses, and that when government does more than those things, society collapses. We believe that the government's purpose is to protect human rights. That is the purpose of government in libertarian philosophy. So things like defense. We believe in things like basic education. So, K through 12 education, but not necessarily higher education, where the student gets a financial profit from going through school. Things like regulating transportation so that we're not both driving on the same lane of traffic. And things like copyright laws and making sure that we have a standard for practicing intellectual property protection. These are things that the government can and should do, and they lead to a better, more productive society. But they're not just random. The government isn't here to tell you what religion to practice. It isn't here to tell you what kind of charity you have to practice. It isn't here to tell you how to live your life or how to think or what public philosophy you have to subscribe to. Right? The government is not here to tell you who to be. Right? Any more than your mother is here to tell you who to be. Your parents are here to put you on the road of life and make you a self-actuating adult. The purpose of government is to prevent the powerful from taking advantage of the weak. And one of the problems that we see in government is the more power you put in government, and the more government is based on opinion and this nebulous balance instead of actual structural principles of government. What you see is that the powerful and the rich take over the government. As Karl Marx said, if the advancement of legislation for the protection of the working class, both in mind and body, has become inevitable, they have also accelerated the concentration of capital into the hands of a few. What Karl Marx just said there is that many of the laws that we put in place for the protection of the poor and the disadvantaged actually contribute to harming them. One thing, let's look at a lot of the healthcare laws. That's really in the news a lot. So let's say you force a business to provide healthcare for its employee. Well, that money isn't just magically falling from heaven, right? Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the company's employment budget. So they cut the wages of workers in order to provide health care for workers. If you put a tax on businesses, what do the businesses do? Do they magically go to the money tree in the backyard and magically get this money? No. They raise their prices and they lower their wages. And if the business can't make a profit, then it goes out of business, and then they don't employ anybody. And this is the problem with a lot of government regulation and a lot of government controls. A lot of people, they think the government should make people better people. Well, whose definition of better? My definition of better? Because as an elected official, that's what I'm going to go off of. I'm going to force my moral and my religious decisions on you. That's the problem with public policy. And we tolerate it in America because we have this democratic system where we all vote, and so the majority of people get their way. Well, just because you're in the majority doesn't mean that you have the right to force your opinion on the minority. You need to respect the rights of people, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. And that's the ideology that I represent in government. There are plenty of philosophies out there that I disagree with, but as a state representative, I will still defend those philosophies and people's right to practice them, people's right to live by them, even though I disagree with them.